Now, wonder is the foundation of every great achievement. It's what bonds us together, pushes us to keep finding solutions, and lets us create something from nothing. Without that spark, there is no science, no creativity, no thirst for knowledge, or hunger for change. But with it, the breakthroughs our customers need most are just one innovation away. As we work to create a more connected world, a more circular economy, and more climate-conscious technologies and solutions, we're designing products alongside our customers with their biggest challenges in mind, so we can grow with the world around us, starting with our promise to reach zero carbon emissions by 2050. Every solution we find is fueled by wonder and powered by science. It's this fuel that drove our past and propels us to the future. Wait until you see where wonder takes us next.
Cool. Well, thank you, Dow. Thanks so much for sponsoring us, allowing us to do more programs like this. And our hope is that, again, we are elevating everybody to be able to be their fully authentic selves and to become more capable in their leadership. I put a question in the chat box. For those of you that have had a chance to watch the previous videos or have joined us, love to hear, what's something that you heard, saw, or learned from our sessions that stood out. Love to have you add that in the chat box. Kind of helps me to get a little bit of feedback on what's resonating. And in the meanwhile, I'm going to do a quick journey for us down memory lane. I'll kind of go highlight really quick to set up our story for today, a short recap of some of the things that we talked about to kind of help us understand how do we show up as our full authentic selves and how do we become these leaders that allow us to really engage fully with our strengths, our weaknesses, and really leverage them so that we can accomplish our goals. So with that, we started out on this journey to talk about, why is it that we might have recognized that sometimes the best individual contributors aren't often seen as becoming leaders. And this tool typically I use this for people that have difficulty becoming leaders. They might have been a manager, maybe they're a VP, and a lot of people are complaining about them in their 360 values that they don't want to follow them. And so this is how we show this slide. But I'm reframing this in a way for each one of you to consider if you're not getting promoted, you're not seeing effectiveness in people following you, or you're not being recognized for the work that you do, then why is it they're not seeing you as someone that is able to lead other performers? And a lot of that might be is if we are stuck in just doing things the way we feel comfortable, meaning that we're only comfortable doing things our own way or how we feel like we could perform our best, then a lot of times we kind of narrow the gap of the type of people we have a chance to lead. So if you think about just me, and I use this example of being right-handed, if I only could do things with my right hand, I am very limited in my capacity, my capabilities in terms of working with either just, scissors. A lot of times they make left-handed or right-handed ones, but just in general, being able to drink water while I'm operating a mouse. And just imagine as you're typing, your ability to do things left and right-handed are very helpful. Even that is probably a great example of ways that, at first, if you learned how to type, you might have just used your right hand. And then slowly your teacher or somebody was trying to get you to use your left hand. And then over time, you had to learn how to type without having to look at your fingers. And in that progression is probably a great example of just because something feels uncomfortable doesn't mean it's something you can't do, as well as just because it's something that you can't do doesn't mean it's inauthentic to you. And so that's where we talked about like different things about our personalities, where there's a combination of nature, like I'm naturally right-handed, or I naturally like to work with people that like to smile. I naturally have a certain disposition based upon my brain wiring that helps me to think about who are the different type of people I like to work with, what are certain preferences I have in terms of my engagement level. And using Myers-Briggs, for example, it's just one of the myriad tests. It helps you to consider what are some of those wirings like. Now we added this different component, secondly, and talked about nurture. So nurture is over time, whether it's through your parents, maybe your teachers, your best friend, maybe a romantic interest. These are the different people that help you to do things that you may not feel comfortable. So some of you might have taken, like, let's say, a Myers-Briggs test, right? And you might have gotten one of these letters, or they said, "Hey, which Star Wars character are you?" You might have come up as Yoda one time, and then all of a sudden you became Darth Maul. Like, what happened? Well, sometimes we may be so good at different skill sets, we have the ability to switch from nature and nurture at different times. And that is us being able to activate different areas of our brain. And these are just growth skills. So I may do things left-handed without thinking about it, just because over time I'm more comfortable and I can have that competency where I call it unconscious competency, something that I can do very well without even thinking about it. And so these are two different type of leadership behaviors at play. We call that nature and nurture. And realistically, my argument for you to be a fully authentic person in your leadership skills is learning how to do nature and nurture, managing it specifically for a desired outcome, and that your leadership behaviors are really a choice in all those different matters. And so going back, we then said, well, what if we said your strengths, we try to limit it to 70% of the time, and your weaknesses we did 30% of the time. And that it gives you this ability to say, well, I'm not only going to do things in my strength 100% of the time, but I'm going to leverage that energy that I have and invest it in some of these things that I have to learn how to do, even though it's draining and it maybe feel difficulty. I'm not going to do it so much that it makes me maybe incapacitated in the work that I have, or it's going to put me in such a negative state that it's going to make me grouchy or someone that I'm unbearable to live with. Someone asked a question in one of the sessions about why 70/30 is. I think naturally you already do things in an 80/20 mix, right? As part of Pareto's principle. But subjectively, if you could think, I'm going to do something intentionally and grow something, my real challenge to you is like, what can you add intentionally 10% of the time so that you can be more deliberate in that learning process? And that's where we come up with 70/30. And so, one of the things that we talked about was like, writing with your other hands. We did this little pencil exercise where you wrote your name with your right hand, and then we closed our eyes and see if we could sign our names. And then we did it with our other hand. And that draining feature was a little bit of how you can index on whether or not something is in your 70 or it's in your 30, as well as how draining it can be and how can you regulate that to do that a little bit more intentionally. And some applications we said is like, well, if you wait to do the things that you don't like to do at the end of the day, more likely you're going to be drained. You're not going to be happy. And if it's something that you're not good at and you don't like, waiting till the end of the day probably won't give you the best results. So some of the best practices I teach leaders is, what if you were to put that earlier in the day at a time when you have more energy and you're able to complete those tasks a lot more competently. And towards the end of the day, when things are getting a little bit tired, well, you save the best things for last, and it helps bring up that energy level in a way that you could still perform things in a competent way, right? So that's a little bit of that 70/30 principle at work and how you can benefit from it. And then our last session in workshop two, we started talking about the peace index. And the peace index, I said, was a little bit of an indicator for you on how do you measure how well you are doing, for example. And well, we said, well, your peace index is an average of these different indices scores that you would rank from 1 to 100. So if I were to say, well, how would you rank yourself with all the people that you engage with and different people that you see from a score of 1 to 100 in your life? You may give that a certain score. And let's just say, for simplicity purposes, let's just say it's 60. And then for you living out your purpose in life, what would you give that for a score 1 to 100? Again, you might say like, oh, that's a little bit like 50. Maybe for place, you say, oh, I like my place, score that on 1 to 100, like a 70. And then maybe for provision and say, well, that's a little like a 40 in a way. But your personal health, that's running at like, let's say an 80, right? And if I take all those scores and I average them out, your peace index would reflect that. And that score would be about 65 based upon the numbers I just gave. And that 65, again, it's subjective. 65 for some might be like rocking it, where some people might feel like that's very low. But by numbering these and start seeing maybe in rank order which ones you're doing really well in and which ones you're struggling with, then it may help you to say, some of these are in my 30 and I need to give a little bit more attention to because of diminishing returns. If I continue to index on the things that I'm already good at and I like, then it's going to be really hard to lift up some of those challenging areas. So those areas that you're not really spending time with because it's a little bit draining, you may have to work on that a little bit better. So for example, let's say the people around me are already great, right? Like I've got Fabian here, I got Brian here. What more can I ask in my time today? Well, if I were to say, well, I want to keep adding greater people, and I'm trying to do that to make up for maybe my personal health isn't doing too well, then there's only so much diminishing returns I can have, but my overall peace index may increase better if I were to work on my personal health. The second thing I talked about specifically on personal health was personal health tends to be one of the ones that give you capacity to make changes in all the rest of these indices. What I mean by that is if you aren't feeling good, right? Or you aren't able to maybe think of different ways to accomplish tasks or learn how to do different things, or you just feel like you're not living with values that you are proud of. Well, that all comes back to your personal health. It's your ability to either do things or make adjustments in your life. And a lot of these things, if you want to change it, is going to take a lot of personal health. And so this is the one that I said, well, let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into personal health to help us to evaluate what is it that we can work on. And so we dug a little bit deeper and say like, hey, how is your physical health? Are you physically able to do the things that you want to do? Your intellectual health, are you able to learn things that you need to learn? Emotional health, are you able to regulate your emotions in a way that helps you to feel like you're in control or perform your tasks? And spiritual health might be as well, how well can you live maybe within your values? Not necessarily a religious thing, but do I feel like I'm frustrated? Am I and frustrated to the fact that I get mad at someone, right? That's emotional health. But then my spiritual health might be as I'm unable to forgive people. That might be a value that you have. I might not have a positive outlook, right? And act upon it. That might be a spiritual thing, even though it's driven by emotions. But our intellectual health might also be one of those things where my manager asks me to learn something. I'm emotionally frustrated that I have to learn something from my manager I don't like to spend time with. And so therefore I'm spiritually unable to live my best, which is a value that I have. But it all could be because I'm physically just having a tough time. Whether it's, think back to the time when I had COVID, right? COVID physically drained me. Intellectually, I couldn't learn anything. Emotionally, I was a wreck. And I say this tongue in cheek, but I felt like I could kill somebody just to feel so much better, especially when things weren't going the way I wanted to, right? So these are all in line, and these all have opportunities for growth. So we then indexed it to say, well, how do we manage growth? And going back to session one to say, well, a lot of times, if you want to only work in your things in your 70 or things that are in your strength, what we try to say is we're always trying to index where it has high energy and positive feelings. And if we only index there, then we can't grow. And so I gave a little bit of example of like if I go to the gym, if I only lift 10 pounds and I'm doing that over and over again, because it feels good, I feel like I could do it forever, I'm really not going to grow my muscles. But the real growth comes if my coach says, hey, Jim, that looks a little easy. Let's add 5 more pounds. Well, guess what? I'm going to feel a little negative in my feelings. Doesn't feel as good as when I could do something easily because my muscles are adapting and learning. They're shaking a little bit, but I still have high energy. I'm still able to perform that workout. What follows that would be a little bit of what we call a burnout zone. I'm done with my workout. I'm going home. I'm super tired, low energy. I'm feeling a little exhausted. It's probably a negative feeling, but I'm going home. I'm opening the door, trying to take a shower, and I'm struggling with this shirt that's stuck on me because my muscles are so weak. Those are negative feelings, a little burnt out, but that's not necessarily a bad thing because we know if you do this in a healthy way, you have a recovery time, you eat well, you sleep well, and Brian could probably tell you all about this because he's an expert in this type of area, but you're going to come back stronger and better in what you do. So I try to color these into like different feelings and different zones and help you to manage where are you along this journey a lot of time. And I'd like for you to consider if you're doing things a little bit in your 70/30, you're probably able to navigate within these like red and green areas. But if you're constantly in this red zone where these feelings are a little bit more on the dangerous side, so I would say if I'm working out and I'm lifting too much, what happens here is I get negative because I get injured. And my burnout zone is really, I can't do anything because my muscles don't move. I pulled a muscle, pulled a hamstring, or something like that happens. You're in pain, right? You don't get to come to a recovery zone where you perform better. You actually are trying to get back into the survival zone. And a lot of times, sometimes if you're constantly redlining at work, you feel like you're burning the candles on both ends, you're probably going back and forth from here to here. And you might have been like me back in early ons of my career, where I was constantly in this zone, and my vacation was really the only way I escaped from being in this red zone. And it was the only time I felt like I was in my performance zone. Some of you guys that live for the weekend, some of you guys go Friday night, like those that say work hard, party hard kind of thing. Again, we want to regulate that into a healthy atmosphere because I would come back from my vacation, probably back to here and needing a vacation from my vacation before I went back to work up here, right? So this is again, I'm trying to draw awareness using these frameworks to help you identify where are you at, and what does your capacity look like in health so that you could perform better. Okay. So that's framing us all up for our conversation today. And so I'm going to take us back into 70 a little bit and talk about understanding when we are fully authentic, why is it not just all support and why a little bit of challenge is going to help bring out the fully authentic part of us, not just the authentic part that we feel is what we want other people to see, right? Because authenticity isn't just what's on the outside, right? It's all the other stuff that is going on inside as well. So, as we move forward, remember, we talked about like 70/30, and 70 was all the things that were like in your strengths. And I'll put that in this high support camp. And then the things that are like your weaknesses, I'll call that challenge. And I'll put that in this right-hand side of this graph. And when you think about like all the things that are helping you and supporting you and all things that are challenging you, there's different ways to look at this. And if you had a mindset that, again, I only want to work on the things that are comfortable for me and where I feel 100% energized, right? Then what I'm going to say is you're kind of putting yourself in this upper left-hand quadrant of high support and low challenge. And this, in fact, I want you to start looking at what type of culture do you breed around you? And I meet a lot of managers that they mean well, right? Like they're here. I want to help my employees. I want them to succeed. In fact, I was on a coaching call with about 12 executives. And on our call today, a lot of them struggled in letting their team sometimes fail with margin, calculated failure. And a lot of that was because they don't want the other person to feel bad, or they don't want to set them up for failure. But what happens is if you provide high support and low challenges, you create a culture around you where there's high entitlement as well as what we call mistrust. What I mean by that is if I give a challenge or I ask my employees to do a certain amount of work, but I'm always bailing them out, what happens is they may feel like the work that they have to do is not really what they have to do. And in fact, they can get away with not having to be uncomfortable. But that's not really the case, right? Like we all have to grow. We all have to try things and we all have to be willing to learn. And so unfortunately, if I say, well, hey team, we have to do, 80 units of work by the end of the week. And some of you like, hey, Jim, I've got like, some things that come up and I need a little bit of pass, do you mind if I do 70? I might be like, hey, totally understand. That's cool. I understand it. And you let 70 now become the new standard. while the other people on the team that made sacrifices and maybe had to make some tough decisions were able to still get 80 out there, is you can feel like they don't trust you anymore because when you say one thing, it now leads to something else. And the harder work that other people had to do will not be recognized. And then the people that were able to get away with less may feel entitled in a way that they don't have to do their commitments and do have their hard work, and over time can breed that. Now, I want to be very clear. I'm not saying that we don't give allowances or accommodations for certain circumstances that come out. But those need to be maybe clarified. Those need to be maybe communicated in a way so people understand that you're not creating a culture of doing less, but it's an opportunity for them to understand that there is a cost to it and that later on we're going to have to find a way to make up for that difference. Or if we find a repeated pattern of behavior that mimics doing less, then we may have to have conversations because it's not okay as the norm, but it's all right considering the circumstances of what we have. Okay. So again, just trying to talk about if you're constantly working in this type of an area where everybody has to be comfortable all the time, you may be in a protect zone. Now, for yourself, I want you to consider if your mindset is also, I can only do work a certain way that I feel comfortable with. Your manager may feel like you are entitling yourself to pick and choose and only do the things that you want to do, and that your full job title is not something that you are required to do, that you signed up for. And so then your manager is going to mistrust when your manager assigns work for you, whether or not you're going to accomplish all that work. And so then there's going to be a rift that's going to hurt. There'll be a little bit of a chasm because they're going to expect you to cross the finishing line, but you may fall short at the end because you discovered it was something that you didn't feel comfortable with and it felt inauthentic in how you had. And so my hope is as you kind of understand this quadrant, that there's this opportunity for growth to occur. And it doesn't always occur when you're fully comfortable. And so the challenge that I want you to take is not an unhealthy challenge that leads to this red zone of domination. And I'm hoping this red and green will kind of help you to remember there's a domination side that's too unhealthy when there's too much challenge that doesn't meet the support of what you're already capable to do. But there's this area of growth that you have where it may not be so much in the red, but it's going to be a little uncomfortable. And this is where the growth opportunity occurs because you don't know what you're capable of doing until you give it a try. And if you have the right support from the people around you to help you to accomplish it, you may not be able to get the consistent, 100% completion like you did, or might not get the perfect results that you're used to. But your ability to start growing into that direction is really where that opportunity lies. That your growth opportunity may be if you came here, it's way better to be up here. I'm sorry, it's way better to be down here than up here protecting yourself because in this quadrant, you at least have an opportunity and a time to grow. And you're going to discover things about yourself that you could do that before you didn't feel like you could do at all. So hopefully this graph kind of helps you understand what is it like for you to be in this mode where you're constantly trying to comfort yourself and maybe not feel uncomfortable, but then regulate it to a point where it's going to create entitlement around you and how other people may see you. Now, for some of you that work hard and maybe party hard, you may be in this category. And this might be because you have high expectations for yourself. You may have unrealized goals that you have to meet and have to do, and you're finding yourself constantly having to keep the promises that you've made to other people implicitly, but you're finding that they're hard to keep. So, for example, if you're constantly feeling like the way you got promoted or the reason why you want career advancement is because you're always perfect in your output, then what you're doing is you're creating this high challenge that isn't sustainable. And over time, just like the analogy of going to the gym and doing too much weight where you may get injured, you're going to get stuck into this type of trap. And there's a whole nother lesson on what I would say the high performance trap. If you follow on SACE, Eileen Chang does a wonderful job talking about accidental diminishers, where as a leader, you're not able to trust other people to fail because you constantly have to show off that you're an A student or you're a 100% achiever in what you do. That's a whole nother conversation, but I did want to mention her and allude to that in case that might be helpful for you. But what if you're in this trap, right? Well, this is where you kind of got to get yourself out. And I think it's okay to not live in this place where you're going to fear what does it look like if you don't do things at a higher level. And as well as you're feeling like you have to manipulate yourself or manipulate the community around you for them to believe that you can do something, even though you may not feel like you can do it yourself, right? So that's a whole nother part of being fully authentic in your capabilities. But again, this is where if you set yourself up for failure and only being comfortable in certain things, where you can challenge yourself to be trapped in this high domination phase. And the reality is going to be is the only way you can get out of that is to ask for help. A lot of times at work, they can't reduce the load that you have to do, right? And we don't want to necessarily lower the performance of it or lower the goals, right? But what we want to do is what are some things that we could do to set you up so that you have a learning phase? And so if you are in this stage and maybe in this part of the corner and the challenge is too high, my argument would still be it's better to be here than over here where you're achieving high challenge with very low support to say, hey, manager, the perceived challenge is less. I'm going to do the same amount of work, but the perceived challenge is less because I have somebody to help me out. And one of the best leadership stories I think I learned in this, believe it or not, was one of my times when I was in San Francisco. I was up there working on the corner of Third and Folsom. I was commuting, taking the BART station, walking a mile, grabbing a coffee, and having to carry a lot of stuff. And I remember one day it was really windy. I was opening up the door, and I remember like the door kind of slammed. It like slammed shut because the wind was so windy, and a person was right behind me. And I remember saying like, the person asked like, "Hey, do you need some help? Can I carry something?" And I go, "Oh no, I got it," right? And so then I did this thing where I opened the door again. I put my foot to prop it open, and I try to get around the door, and the wind slammed it again, and I got coffee all over myself. Okay, that is an illustration of me. The challenge was high. I didn't take the support for the perceived challenge to be lower. In fact, I dominated myself. And I use that same story to talk about like how foolish I looked. Again, it's me, being a leader that has like a lot of maybe this, but when someone comes up to me and works with me and being able to lead other people, it was very much zero. I lost total influence of this person. And the sadder part is, after that, the guy's looking at me, he's kind of has some pity. He was there to help me. And he's like, man, what a fool. Like, could have avoided this if he asked me. I don't walk in to work with, coffee stains on my shirt. In fact, even more embarrassing was going in the elevator, going up to the fourth floor with this same person, right? Is like, what a horrible story I had to live out, right? But the empowerment and the opportunity could have been, and what I learned since then was not only accepting the help, right? But learning how other people navigate things. I learned a networking skill. One of my networking skills that I train people on is always say yes when people offer to help and always give them something to do and allow that to be an opportunity to have conversations, to meet people, get to know them. But ultimately, that was an opportunity that I didn't get to do, and I really didn't feel empowered that I could do that ever again. Right. And now the fun fact is, if I'm ever in a similar situation, I will sometimes just wait outside for somebody to open the door and ask them, hey, do you mind holding the door for me? And I'll walk in. It's rather be outside and wait. And I think that's a little bit of maybe being here, right? It's high energy, but I don't feel good about waiting. I'm a little anxious. Maybe I'm a little irritable having to wait in those areas, but I'm not going to be so much so where I'm fearful of like the door slamming back on me and then later having a pity party on my desk because I smell like coffee, I got stains all over the place, and nobody wants to be with me. Instead, I can navigate through that journey, enjoy the walk up, have a great conversation with somebody, and walk to my desk, totally in the performance zone of what I have and what I do, right? And so going back to this, what happens if we are constantly not putting our position to learn? What happens a lot of times is you'll start playing this game where you're darned if you do, darned if you don't, right? Imagine going back and forth along those negative feeling wall where you're going up and down here. That's the same thing that tends to happen when you're here. So, for example, going back to the story, my manager may not trust me anymore, doesn't feel like I'm capable of doing the work that I have to do. Eventually, what I see a lot of times is they may put me on a plan. Like, hey, Jim, we talked about being able to do this work, or hey, you're constantly having reasons or excuses why you can't do the job that you need to do. Is, well, you know what? We're going to have to force you at some point. And that person's going to then start dominating me. And then, sure, at any point, I could just, muscle through for like 90 days to get out of that pit plan. And then you're going to be so exhausted, you're going to want to come back here. And a lot of times I see relationships with people that say, like, this was my favorite job. I love the company. I hated my manager. That could be, I think, on both ends, a manager that protected too much and then dominated, or a person that was dominated couldn't communicate up because they protected the manager and they constantly went back and forth. Ultimately, what happens is they don't feel like anything they do because they're indexing too much. They're going 100% zero or 0 to 100. They end up in this area called abdication. And abdication is this area, and I think it usually happens with you have no self-awareness. Like you're not aware of the learning opportunities that you had here, or you're not aware of how many people want to help you to succeed. And instead of challenging yourself to grow and putting yourself in a liberate quadrant, you only feel like you can do things the way you feel comfortable. Well, there's not that field of life where you only do things in a comfortable way starts to diminish over time. And then you end up in the abdicate section of what you do. And so looking at this chart in itself, I'd love for you to consider like, where are you showing up day to day? And if you're saying like, I want to show up fully, I think as a coach, what I found is most people don't really realize that their true full potential is not even tapped yet. Like a lot of it's going to be way up here. And the human body is so amazing in terms of what it can do to adapt. And even when injury occurs, like physically, the human body's resiliency with your mind, your emotions, and living out what I would say your pies, the different areas of your personal health, is so resilient to play between these different aspects of your health that there's always going to be opportunity for growth in whatever you do. And I was really challenged and reminded the other day. I was watching this clip I saw online of Kobe Bryant. And Kobe Bryant, when he tore his Achilles heel, I remember him saying that like everything that he did, all this in his 17 years of basketball, at the age of 35, he tore his Achilles heel. And I think he was here, and at some point he felt he was here. He said, like, I was at the top of my game. I'm working out really hard. And then I tore my Achilles heel, and that's a career-ending injury for most people. What is he going to do? Is he going to live his life where everything is now a highlight reel in the past? Or is he going to come back? And what he realized was when he saw himself as a victim mindset, there was an aspect of his life he also saw he was protecting. That he had to be the Kobe Bryant that he was during a healthy Achilles heel. But he said that now he gets to be the Kobe Bryant post operation as he recovers. And he said that there's a quote. He says, if you ever find me being attacked by the bear, feel bad for the bear, right? And that was so powerful, right? Because you think about like what's the situation, and if you ever find yourself in a dominating situation, my question to you is, what is the support that you need that you're not asking for that's going to help you to even put yourself here? you may be at the exact same time, like Kobe was doing, is protecting entitled beliefs. Entitled beliefs that you can do this all by yourself. It might be a belief that, you know what, I don't need to learn anything else. I'm just going to keep doing things the same way. Or, I have to do this a certain way. And what about my manager think about me if I ask for help? Wherever those spectrums are, if you think about it, you're not really being authentic to yourself. To be fully authentic means what are some things that may be in your weaknesses that are probably the blind spots in your life that you could bring in a way that allows you to find liberation and growth, as well as the support you need to feel empowered so that you can accomplish more things in the future, as well as achieve things that you never even thought you could do before. So, with that, I hope this was very helpful for you in navigating through all the different tools, seeing how they play out, and allowing yourself to see where are you in this quadrant, and then from it, where can you go next in terms of really realizing your full authentic self with greater empowerment and opportunity. And with that, I did want to give a chance for people if they want to ask questions. What can I clarify in my presentation so far? What didn't make sense? Or you're like, hey, Jim, that doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand what this is going for. I'd love to take a moment to kind of share that. So, Aaron, thanks for raising your hand. Love to hear. And yep,
Hi, thanks. I'm Erin. Really appreciate the last few videos. I missed the other two in the series, but I found them very useful. I was just thinking about for a lot of people who may be like mid-level to senior, thinking about their next steps. I know a lot of people I tend to mentor, they tend to be ICs, in engineering or technical that may be thinking about switching to management. Or for like myself, I've had many different steps in my career where I've transitioned from a non-traditional background. And I think parallel to anyone that's in STEM, and I'm in STEAM, so I'm on both the creative and the technical side. If you focus on B2B, B2C, how can you apply, I guess, maybe the piece method to
hmm
that? So, for example, I guess if you could go back
yeah,
another slide, like maybe like my purpose, I was trying to build $100 million venture capital fund and studio.
sure.
And, it was 50% creative, 50% tech. I was like, well, creative is really hard. It's where my heart is. But if you look at something like Gold House, which is like super successful, I'm like, I'm more technical. Where do I find my piece if, say, creative is in New York and LA, and I'm looking at offers like you could be managing or sub managing a division for Disney Plus versus, oh, well, you could be working at, I don't know, I get calls from Apple TV Plus, Apple Vision Pro is like a secret team, right? I'm like
Yeah.
talking to. And I personally am like, oh, well, I'm in the Bay Area. There's health issues, there's family. So I'm like trying to decide. And I don't know if other folks relate to this, but like, what my peace index would be, because I'm kind of at this intersectional fork in the road where I'm having trouble calculating the percentage. And maybe to caveat with that, and this is just a last personal example, I got COVID in 2023, and that's why I shut down my venture studio since I had Graves' disease. And, that kind of took me out. So when you had the other quadrants of like, well, I often overcommit or I'm in the dominating, sort of things, I'm such a perfectionist, it forced me to slow down where I realized provision, you're underpaid, you're overworked, you're taking on too much work. Where I find a lot of women in tech, particularly those that are directors of engineering, CTOs, investors, et cetera, it's the most difficult thing when you're thinking about how do I manage having kids or elderly parents. Sandwich generation, it's not necessarily particular to just women, like men also have this as well. However you want to identify gender, sexual orientation, whatever,
Yep.
that your quadrants, however you're deciding the next career step, your peace index changes. And so I'm trying to figure out like what's a good framework to, I guess, apply both as you're deciding a different scale of like, why do I take this stage of my career to take this decision in this path versus this decision in this path of my career, where it may satisfy different percentage points in your peace index as like different factors of why you would select something. So I hope that makes sense. I know that was kind of a lot, but yeah.
Yeah, let me see if I can restate your question. And number one, thank you for boldly coming on camera and asking. And number two, sorry you had such a traumatic experience. It sounds like going through COVID and having to
Yeah.
pivot. Um, a couple of things I'm hearing from you, Aaron, and let me know if they resonate. Number one is I'm hearing you're trying to create this perfect plan as well. And you're trying to
Right.
accomplish too many things, I think, at the same time, which is not bad in terms of having a big picture vision for yourself. I 100% want everybody to do it. The challenge becomes is what's that timeline look like and how you get there and what you do.
Right.
Um, and then how I heard you frame this was by maybe either a title, a role, maybe a company that you're working with as a purpose. But what I didn't hear, Aaron, was how are these going to serve your purpose as much as your purpose being maybe subjective to a company in a way or defined by it?
Right.
Am I accurate in hearing those that way?
Yeah, no, I feel like if I compare this to like Bing Chen from Gold House, it's like you're 51% creative and 49% systems thinker and engineer. Mine's actually the flip. I'm like, oh, I'm more technical. But if I was thinking, if you chose a certain company or even a different region to kind of prep for, like, oh, well, I didn't get this experience that I would really think is more aligned with my mission, vision, and values, then maybe that would influence my decision to take a different path in my career. But you have to weigh in the other factors like, oh, you have elderly parents,
Yeah,
physics,
yeah,
etc. So I kind of feel pulled of like, oh, all of these other things that I don't want to say detract from my purpose factor into like maybe that's later in the timeline. So I find myself shifting with my peace index, and maybe I'm over projecting and planning in the future. I often have to tell myself to live present in the moment. So that's also why I'm looking at, everything that you shared is amazing, but I keep thinking like, is there a missing framework that's in my head that's combining these things that's kind of like, um I don't want to say like I have a missing piece. Like I know
yeah,
I kind of have my own blind spot, so I'm trying to make sure that
sure.
like I'm thinking holistically with this framework in like stages of time, because I'm sure many people here are at different stages of their career, whether they're mid, junior, senior, etc. And what that next step is, for the next stage of their career, as well as like, holistically in their, personal life as well.
Yeah. So thanks for clarifying. I think one of the things that I'm pulling out from this might be, Aaron, is um, by indexing your purpose into your career, I think you're putting yourself at a disadvantage,
Mhm.
and I think it's limiting your options. So, for example, I'm going to give a high assumption, but Aaron, you seem like a very wonderful person that I would want to spend time with, partly also because you're so sacrificial and you probably are good at protecting other people, but at the expense of dominating yourself. What I mean by that is you're probably really good at like serving other people. Like you would give the shirt off your back, but you would have a
Right.
hard time asking somebody that had three shirts if you could borrow one, right?
Right.
And
Yeah,
so what that means
absolutely.
is that your life is always going to be subjective to the employer that you serve. Okay. And that
Mhm.
puts you in a different position. I'm trying to
Right.
get you to be like here, if not at
Right.
least here, but you're doing this, which is
Yeah.
why everybody's like you're the tail being wagged by everybody else. And that is why you're constantly in a way chasing and your purpose is being very
Right.
objective by a company. Now,
Right.
and that's not bad in terms of why you want to work for a company and what you're looking for the company to give you. Now, if
Right.
you hear that, now there's a different PowerPoint, right? What I mean by that
Right.
is now you're saying, hey, I'm joining you because I need something from you, but I got
Right.
something greater in my purpose that I want to live. And I kind of
Mhm.
heard you talk about family in there. Now, I'm going to tell
Mhm.
you a little bit about my story. And then from it, you may be able to reposition the perspective a different way. And this may super help you on which job you choose, navigating through
Mhm.
challenges, and all those other things. So, for example, if you're constantly putting yourself at deficit because you're giving away your t-shirts, but you're freezing, your capability of constantly helping others stay, clothed as a
Mhm.
purpose is going to be very short-lived, right? So if your purpose is
Mhm.
to help somebody else, but you're not giving yourself what you need to be able to continue to give. You're living with purpose, but also your purpose can be very short. Now, think about the other way around. What if your goal was to give out shirts to everybody else, but you were only able to figure out a way to give out shirts to other people because you had plenty of shirts coming in? So
Yeah.
if I could say your buckets on this piece index were constantly being filled by your employer, then you're going to look for an employer not necessarily by the work that you do, but how is that work also going to take care of you and feed you? Then I think your purpose would feel a little bit more greater. And so the story I want to share with you is that my life was all about before I got married was like, hey, how can I retire my parents? Right. And so a lot of the work I did was I hustled, I worked really hard, I worked for a company and I was willing to take challenges. I was willing to grow because I knew if they told me the work that I did, that that equation would mean that I would have this kind of finances and I would be able a chance to take care of my parents. And that worked, right? I hopped around. I felt like I did whatever they wanted me to do. But in that time, I also chose positions that down the road, I knew that I wanted to also be the best dad and the best husband in my ever before I was even married, right? So that means like I got to build my skill sets and capabilities. So if I'm going to work for somebody and I'm going to make the money that I need to retire my parents, how can I also do this in a way that helps me to create a long-term vision that I live a life that I want to live and I don't care how I'm doing it, right? So like right now I'm doing this with SACE. This is great. I love SACE because it embodies a lot of values I have. It embodies a lot of the community I want to serve. And there's a lot of my past that align with it. It's great that I do this. But I was at Handel's ice cream last night with my daughter. It's like, man, would I be willing to scoop ice cream to do that? I would. I'd make so many kids happy. Maybe a lot of parents grumpy because I'm overstimulating them. But I could see my purpose living out in that way. But they're not going to provide sometimes the financial, intellectual, or emotional stimulation and growth opportunities that I need to feel like I'm becoming better and able to also serve the people I love, right? So when I'm putting things in that perspective, Aaron, I'm going to challenge you to say, Aaron, that's great that you're willing to do whatever you can for Apple to kind of take care of your STEAM skill sets and giftings. But how can that giftings as you serve the companies that you want to do and activate them and grow them in a certain way, how can you make sure that they're serving you and what you need? And this is where like provision may come into place and people in place. So let's say you're living out that purpose in your work that you want to do. Um, Maybe they're going to pay you, but sometimes in California they don't pay you enough, especially depending on where you live. And so your place suffers because it's not the quality of a place that you want to live. The people around you isn't good. And then your personal health is kind of suffering because you're working around the clock, you got long commutes, and you're barely making that purpose that you live. And so what
Mhm.
I had to do at some point, I had to make a big pivot. It was really hard. But because I got all the work experiences I had, I worked in management, I became a director, I became a VP. And along that way, I wanted to learn how to sell. I wanted to learn how to create businesses. I wanted to learn how to make market decisions. I wanted to learn how to study market spaces and then also train and build teams. I felt confident enough to say, hey, at some point, I'm going to move out of the beautiful town of Culver City, where Brian and I spent a lot of our time in our youth. And then from it, I moved out to the valley. And now I live out in Santa Clarita. It's not the glorious place of Silicon Beach that I lived in, but where I live now, my place is serving me. I get to be around the people that serve me. And now I'm constantly looking for jobs that provide the provision I need, as well as living out my purpose, which I can do, if I was you, like, can I still do STEAM work? But what's most important is I'm able to take care of the people I love and do this in a mentally healthy way, physically as well. So that might be the reevaluation conversation that you need to have to kind of help you to kind of say, maybe I got to jiggle things around. And if I were to, not try, like if you ever do a puzzle and you kind of get stuck, like, oh, maybe this one piece is not the right piece I thought it was, even though it looks like it fits, you may have to take that out and then resort your pieces a little bit to say, like, oh,
Mhm.
I think there's a different way I could accomplish this, and then go back at it in a way that it fits a little bit better and healthier for you.
Mhm. This is helpful. Thank you so much for sharing that example and talking just about the your own personal trajectory, upward, and then their decision making framework around that. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and again, it's not easy, Aaron, and but this is where sometimes using the support challenge matrix might be asking you like, okay, Aaron, what are some thoughts that you might be protecting on what you can do or I can't do, right? Like I remember someone said like, oh, I don't know if I can do that. It's like, you just figured out an area that you limited yourself and you've protected that mindset. So what's the
Mhm.
challenge that you need help with in order for you to feel a little bit liberated? Visions are great. I'm just saying you may want to
Mhm.
create a little bit more of a progressive path to get there.
Mhm.
And you may have, like for me, like I didn't want to leave Culver City. I just, rebuilt a house from scratch. That was a dream of me. I bought the house for my parents that we first, bought property on. All this, so much sentimental value in it, but I'm gonna have to let it go, right? And that was where I got liberated and I was really able to accomplish more of my dream. So, okay.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Cool. Thanks so much for that question. That was a really good question, by the way. Um, Shabnan asked a question about experiencing a strong gaslighter at work, and it's really draining emotionally and stressful. How do you communicate your needs? I think one of the biggest things that most people fear is when you're asking for help and you're feeling dominated, that you may be, especially if you're someone like Aaron, where you're very considerate, you're kind, you think about other people's feelings maybe more than your own, that you may be also dominating yourself, that you don't want to bother them, and then you're fearful that gaslighting to also occur. Now, this may not be the perfect response, but the initial try may have to be is letting them know your intention on why you're approaching that person. I might even say, secondly, you may want to let them know of the other things that you tried to do, or some things that you don't want to do accidentally, but you're coming up to that person specifically for support to help them achieve their goals. So a statement like that may sound like, hey, Mr. Manager, thank you so much for giving me this time here. I had a question that I wanted to ask because I really know how important this project is to you, and I know some of the values, and I'm really trying to work on this. I'm having a little bit of struggle in terms of finding the answer. Here are some of the people that I talked to, Robin, Jerry, and Zen, and they were kind of in a pickle as well. So I was wondering, could you give me some time for guidance in what to do next? What you're doing is you're letting them know that their time is important. Number two, you're also sharing your intentions, which I think a lot of people don't tend to do. And they don't realize that if you don't say that, hey, my intention is to help you and my goal is not to waste your time, then that kind of throws that out of the picture. But I think the biggest thing I think, Shabna, that you want to consider for yourself is by being here and asking for support, there's also a little bit of you living in this area, even though you've been gaslit many times, that you're not a victim of being gaslit, right? You don't want to stay in that and finding ways that you could also challenge that you're incapable of support or you're unable um, to get yourself out of the situation and try to find a way that it might be here. Another thing maybe is if you share this with a coworker that about the challenge, not about the challenges that you face with the manager, but like, hey, I need a little bit of help, or when I have some needs, that maybe the two of you can go together and set up a meeting to say, hey, we were talking about some of these needs. I've had some challenges here. Would love if you could help me out, and then presenting it that way, your manager may again hear more of these intentions, may not feel like you're there to intentionally waste their time, as well as the other person, you have some accountability in case if the manager gaslights you or you felt gaslit. Number one, how do you move forward from that? It may be something that you may have to bring up, or on the back end, maybe if your coworker didn't feel like you were being gaslit, but that's how you felt, can help you to process that, right? I'm not trying to invalidate your experiences or what the situation is, but the main thing I wanted you to do is not trap yourself in a situation or how you feel for that area, as well as not stay in this domination session so that you can find some what I would say is some liberation so that you can grow out of that in what you do. Okay. Um, Hopefully that's helpful for you. But for anybody else that's going through these experiences is just try to use this tool to help you see like what are some of the beliefs that you believe that you're not able to get out of, and what are some of the things that maybe you can ask for support on. Because again, a lot of times for us to be someone that can lead other people, it's not about us trying to do this ourselves. It's also really seeing where is that gap in our ability to grow and do things differently, as well as being able to challenge ourselves to engage other people, ask for help, and to really see ourselves as someone that is willing not to do anything by ourselves. Because when you do, management can sometimes see you as a bottleneck in the process and the team. And if everything has to go through you, then the company can't scale. Okay. With that, we are over time, believe it or not. I'm going to stop recording. And if any of you want to hang out, ask some other questions, feel free to do so. Here's my LinkedIn. Feel free to add me if you have any other questions that come up. Feel free to drop them in the notes there. Love to continue the conversation as well. But from it, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. And if any of you guys want to stick around, ask other questions, have some thoughts, and want to come on camera but not recording, feel free to do so. Thank you so much for joining this three-part series. And I hope that you'll continue to join our webinars. We have some great things lined up for the next month. And we'll be talking there on the topic of how do you bring your best when you're learning. So with that, thank you so much, and we'll see you later.